Read with your money. Only on Money FM 89.3.
Now, she's the founder of a media organization that studies the most successful as well as the powerful. And she's distilled secrets of what distinguishes the truly successful from the rest of the pack in her new book. Now, this author says how the successful reason through problems and performing under pressure is part of the reason for their success. Welcome to Read. I'm Dan Koh. And today, I'm speaking with the author of Hidden Genius, Polina Pompliano. So welcome on the show, Polina.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on our show as well. Now, to kick things off, I'd like to first talk about the word success. And to many people, that's often synonymous with the attainment of wealth, fame, as well as honor. So maybe tell us what success actually means to you.
Yeah, that's a fundamental question because when I talk to people, and I've interviewed so many people, it's the way that they define success tells me so much about them. So like you said, if they define it in terms of material things or wealth or fame or status, it tells me about what they value in life. To me, after studying all these people, to me, success is personal. And I've found that each person defines it in a very different way. But me personally, I once heard Anna Quinlan give a commencement speech in which she said something to the effect of, if your success looks good to the world but does not feel good in your heart, then it is not success at all. So I was working at Fortune magazine when I asked myself that question, how do I define success? And at that time, I realized that my definition had been shifting away from the material wealth type of situation more to the personal fulfillment.
Right. Fascinating. Thank you so much for that. I really like that quote that you mentioned as well. Now, I'd like to bring this conversation to an interview that you had with Chamoth Palapa. And he's a Sri Lankan-born Canadian-American venture capitalist, engineer, as well as a SPAC sponsor. And because we are here at Money FM, we'd love to learn a little bit more about this noted investor. So what struck you about the way that Chamoth thinks, or maybe even generates his ideas?
Yeah, he's a fascinating character, as you might be familiar. Yeah. But I think that the thing I learned from him was that the way that he uses his podcast and his newsletter and his brash way of talking to people as almost a feedback loop to get new ideas. So sometimes I've noticed he'll say certain inflammatory things. I'm not even sure he believes, but he'll say them to elicit an emotional or, rational response in some people. But the way that certain people respond, he takes as feedback to generate ideas.
Right. Thank you for that, Polina. Now, who then are some of the successful people that you interviewed for this book? And how are these successful people really different from the rest of us in key ways?
Oh, man. Well, there's two main themes that I really got from interviewing these people and writing the book. So for the book, I interviewed a former MMA heavyweight champion. I interviewed a war photographer. I interviewed Danny Meyer, who's a famed restaurateur in New York City. And the thing that I learned is that the most exceptional people, not only do they define success differently, but they also know that they can always reinvent. So even if they encounter this, if they set out to achieve a really audacious goal and then fall flat on their face and fail miserably, they know that they have the skills to reinvent themselves in whatever way they choose or to pursue the next goal. And the second thing is that at some point in their career or in their life, they bet on themselves. So they leave aside a corporate job or some sort of organization that gives them external validation, and they decide to tie their identity to their own name, however that means for you.
I suppose what I'm taking away from this is a little bit more of how the problems that we face, it's often a breaking point for many of us, and some of us fear the unknown, and which is why it's stopping us from achieving greatness, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And I think the unknown is where all the good stuff lies.
Yeah. It's a bit hard to believe now. I mean, considering how we aren't very sure of what's to come, but it's okay to fail. Now let's talk about the first chapter of your book, which you tackled creativity, and which you say is a skill. So how then can we improve our creativity in this aspect?
In the creativity chapter, I talk about a chef named Grant Achatz, who at one point had the most innovative restaurant in the world called Alinea. It's based in Chicago. And they use very innovative techniques it's just a very unique experience for the diner. So they asked Grant, how do you generate these wild ideas that a lot of your peers just do not do?
Yeah.
And he said that he does not believe that there is a muse or that there's inspiration and that's how creativity comes to you. He's like, on a daily basis, I choose to be creative. And what he means by that is something that, Da Vinci talked about. This is not a new idea, but it's connecting the unconnected or the cross-pollination of ideas across industry. So for example, yes, he is in the restaurant business, but on a daily basis, he says he sees the world through a kaleidoscope of food. So the lens is food, but it doesn't matter what he takes inspiration from as long as he sees it through that lens. So for example, he goes to a museum, he sees a large scale painting on the wall, and he says, I want to eat off of that. Why can't I do that? So then he recreates the painting that he saw in the museum on a tablecloth with various sauces and various things that make the tablecloth look like art.
Wow. So in this, I suppose this sounds a lot like creativity is more of a choice rather than something that, if you're driven enough, you would see your inspiration everywhere, all around you. All right. Now, can you share with us some of the important highlights of the mental frameworks which you say the successful use differently then?
Yes. There's one that I have applied to my everyday life that I've seen a lot of these people use. It's something I heard LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman say. He said, basically, trust is a formula. Trust equals consistency plus time. So whether it's in your professional life, your personal life, your business life, if you are the type of person who is consistent over a long period of time, you are bound to earn people's trust. And I don't think a lot of people have the discipline to stay consistent over a long period of time. We know a lot of people who make these grandiose promises and then break them when things get hard or uncertain. It's the people who stay consistent through times of uncertainty that really earn their customers' trust or their business partners' trust or their spouse's trust.
Staying consistent to earn people's trust. I really like that one. Now, I also like that you mentioned that the highest performers don't use tricks or hacks to achieve greatness. In fact, they use the mental frameworks that fundamentally change the way they see the world. It shows also that how everyday people like you and I can actually attain the same results. So how do successful people manage stress and pressure? How do they not break?
Yeah. So because I'm fascinated by this idea of how do you continue performing under duress or under stress, I found people who have been nearly in seemingly impossible situations, like astronaut Chris Hadfield. And he was blinded outside of the International Space Station as he was working on it. He got some oil mixture in his eye inside of his helmet. So obviously when you're outside of the ISS in space, you cannot just reach and rub your eye. Also, there's no gravity. So the stuff in one of his eyes went into the other, completely blind outside of the International Space Station. So he told himself, okay, well, I've done a lot of training. This has never once come up. This is a truly uncertain, stressful situation that I've never encountered before.
Yeah.
And however, all that training taught him that to stay calm under pressure, you need to tell your mind that you have options. And most of us, in times like that, we just panic. We're like, well, what do we do? And our emotional brain takes over. In the book, I talk a lot about how it's fighting that urge to be emotional and trying to be logical and rational and telling yourself, what are my options? And he had a number of options. He could call Houston, ask for help. He could get his fellow astronaut to help him. He could cry a little bit and let the stuff come out of his eye. He ended up choosing a fourth option, which was pulling a vent on the side of his helmet, letting some air out, and it cleared off. And then he continued working. And it's like that level of I can stay calm no matter what is what astronaut training or Navy SEAL training prepares you for.
Yeah, I suppose it's a lot to do with the control of your emotions as well during high pressure circumstances. That really drives emotion within us, and sometimes it's a little bit hard to keep it all in check. So it really does mask a little bit of how we feel and how we act as well. Now, if there's one person that we know work well under stress and pressure, that's David Goggins as well. He's an American retired United States Navy SEAL, an ultra marathon runner, and he has an interesting insight into how you can use speaking to yourself about truth for change. Can you share more about that, perhaps?
Absolutely. So David Goggins is a fascinating character because he's had a true transformation from going from a really insecure guy to a very, very confident in himself type of person.
Yeah.
He uses a number of different techniques like alter egos, but talking to yourself is one of them that I find fascinating, where he says that most people, when something goes wrong or when life gets hard or when something is painful, in his case, he runs, extreme races.
Yeah.
When something gets really hard and painful, most people listen to themselves, and listening to yourself means the automatic voice that you hear in your head that's like, oh my goodness, my foot hurts. I don't think I can continue this race. I don't think I can give that speech at work. I don't think I can negotiate with my partner. All these things. That's your first instinct. And often listening to yourself, that's not your real voice, he says, because that's probably the voice you've internalized from when you were little, getting bullied at school, or your parents saying something, or a teacher being mean. That's the voice that comes up. But then he's like, then you recognize that, and then you start talking to yourself. A lot of elite athletes do this. There's tons of videos online you can watch. What they do is it's almost like a coach. You start talking to yourself out loud, and you're like, okay, this hurts, but you only have 10 miles to go. You can do this. Come on, Nick, this is your final chance. It's almost a motivating voice that puts you on the offense instead of staying on the defense.
Yeah, it's really self-affirming as well. A little bit like a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you keep encouraging yourself. Besides, usually our biggest enemy is ourselves, right? That's a quote that's been repeated a lot of times as well. Man, we all want to reach our full potential. So what are the ways of doing so that we can work on from your book today? Are there ways of doing so that we can work on from your book today?
Absolutely. There's one really practical thing that your listeners can ask themselves right now. Yeah. And it is that when you go to an event or a conference or a party and somebody asks you, because this will come up, so what do you do? When they ask you, so what do? You will likely answer with your most impressive identity. For me, for many years, that was, I'm a tech reporter at Fortune magazine. Of course, like I demand respect. Yeah. Then you realize that if it is a job title or relationship status, I'm so-and-so's wife, or, a material possession, this is where I live, I vacation here. All those things are external that you could lose. I was reading a quote by Oprah, and she said, don't tie your identity to something that you could lose in the blink of a board meeting. In other words, a lot of these Fortune 500 CEOs, they're CEO one day, and then the board decides something different, and then the next day they're not anymore. They're just Joe.
Average Joe, yeah.
Exactly. So I think think about the way that you answer that question, and then ask yourself, is there something that I can create that ties my identity to my own name that I cannot lose? I can't fire myself. I can't get laid off. A global pandemic can't affect my work or my life in such a dramatic way. So, for me, it's a newsletter that I write or a book that I wrote. It's something that I can tie my name to that I can't lose. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a bit more of our achievements rather than our jobs. Our jobs don't necessarily say or portray what kind of person we are. Now then, how do you generate ideas after writing this book?
So I live in New York City, and the thing that I love about this city is that you walk outside and ideas just just flow to you, because the way that I generate ideas is very similar to how I mentioned Grant does, in that I'll be sitting at a coffee shop and I'll overhear a conversation and be like, wow, that's an interesting point of view. So-and-so thinks a similar way, or so-and-so disagrees. And then it's either, a text message or a conversation over here or something I notice walking down the street that then takes a life of its own and it becomes something bigger. But yeah, it's constant. I'm never at a loss for ideas, because not only are they constant, but I also keep a small notebook in my bag that I jot them down in.
Yeah, it's always good to write your ideas on a book, because sometimes we have tons of them and we don't really remember them throughout the day. So you'll be surprised to know what you've written by the end of it. Now, having studied thousands of the most successful and interesting people in the world, what is the one thing that you'd like our listeners to take away from this conversation?
It is, I already mentioned, take a moment and figure out how you can bet on yourself. One of my favorite quotes is by Beyonce. She says, I don't like to gamble, but if there's one thing I'm willing to bet on, it's myself. So find what your unique advantage is. At the end of the book, in the conclusion, I break down the 10 chapters into 10 questions that you can ask yourself. That will help you hopefully find your hidden genius or your X factor, or the thing that will make you personally fulfilled. One thing I would love to leave your listeners with is, in one of my chapters, I talk about optimizing your content diet, and your content diet being the things that you put into your brain on a daily basis. And a lot of us think it's just, what do I watch or what do I listen to? And yes, that makes up part of your content diet, but it's also, who do you spend the most time with? What ideas are you generating from those conversations?
Right.
And what environments am I putting myself in? And it's those things that make for a balanced content diet. Not to say you can't have some like junk content in there every once in a while, but it's that's what makes you interesting. That's what makes you achieve your goals. And that's ultimately like what makes your life be what it is.
Yeah, optimizing your content diet. It's a bit of a good balance between the good and the bad. But of course, not forgetting, you have to constantly learn every single day. Gamble on yourself, find your unique advantages. It's been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Polina.
It's been awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate it.
All right, we've been speaking to Polina Pompliano, the author of Hidden Genius, about the secrets of what distinguishes the truly successful from the rest of the pack, and how you can unlock your inner genius to achieve greatness today. Continue to keep it right here with us on Money FM 89.3.